Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive deep?
Let's do it.
We're getting into some really juicy stuff today. Like, seriously juicy.
I love when it gets juicy.
Human nature.
Ah, the deep stuff.
We're talking about Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature. I mean, this book,
Yeah, I know this one. Gets right to it,
it does no sugarcoating whatsoever. We're going all in on irrationality.
which we all have.
Exactly. The hidden motivations, those secret desires that we don't even want to admit to
Some that
ourselves.
we don't even realize. The subconscious stuff.
Yeah.
Body language giving us away.
Yes. All those little tells. So basically, we're giving you, the listeners, a new lens to look at the world with,
Yeah.
like a decoder ring for human behavior,
Exactly. To understand yourself better, but also the people around you.
and hopefully navigate your own social world with a bit more finesse.
A little more awareness, which, let's face it, we could all use a little more of. So where do we begin?
Well, Green talks about this idea of a shadow side, this hidden part of ourselves. It's like, are we all secretly villains here?
Okay, so not exactly villains. Think of it this way. There's the you that you present to the world, the polished version.
Right, our best selves.
But underneath, there's this whole other layer, and Green calls that the shadow. All those repressed desires and experiences that shaped us, but we don't want to put on display.
So not good versus evil, just more complex than we appear, ourselves included.
Exactly. We're a mix of light and shadow, just like everyone
Hmm.
else. And, understanding that shadow, both in ourselves and others, that's the key, understanding why people do what they do.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually spot this shadow? It's not like it wears a name tag.
Right. It's subtle. Look for contradictions. You know that friend who's always a little too nice?
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Maybe there's a tell, like a little eye twitch when you mention something they don't like, but they'd never admit it.
Or someone who's all about being rational, but then their pet project fails and they totally lose it.
Yes, stress is a big one. When the pressure's on, that mask slips and you get a glimpse of what's underneath.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've got these shadows lurking beneath the surface, but then Green takes it a step further with nonverbal cues,
Mm.
the things we're saying without even saying them.
It's amazing how much we communicate without words, and often what we're saying with our bodies, with our tone of voice, even those tiny micro expressions.
Micro expressions.
Yeah, those fleeting facial expressions, like a flash of annoyance that disappears as quickly as it came.
Oh, I've totally seen those. Like my old boss, he'd agree to every suggestion in a meeting, but his eyes would narrow ever so slightly.
A classic tell. Learning to read those subtle cues, those nonverbal whispers, it can give you a real advantage in understanding the true dynamics of any interaction.
You're like a human lie detector.
Not quite, but close.
Okay, so we're getting good at this whole decoding thing.
Mm-hmm.
Green also talks about synchrony, how mirroring body language can actually reveal a deeper connection. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh, absolutely. Think about a time you felt totally in sync with someone, like a close friend or a romantic partner. You might not have even realized it, but your breathing probably fell into a similar rhythm. Your posture might have even mirrored theirs.
It's like our bodies are betraying our true feelings even when we're trying to keep them under wraps. So much for playing it cool.
Right. It's those tiny details, those subconscious movements that often speak volumes about what's really going on.
Okay, so we've covered shadows, secret signals. Now buckle up because Green dives headfirst into something we all love to hate: narcissism.
Here we go.
Is he saying we're all narcissists?
Well, Greene argues that we all have narcissistic tendencies. It's part of being human.
So it's not about denying it, it's about understanding it.
Exactly. There's a spectrum, right? There's healthy self love, having confidence and self worth, which is a good thing.
Right, we need that.
And then there's that toxic kind, the kind that's all about getting admiration, lacking empathy. You know the type.
Oh, believe me, I know the type.
Greene actually uses a really interesting example here. Ernest Shackleton, the explorer.
Shackleton, what does he have to do with narcissism?
Okay, so Shackleton, he was ambitious, driven, no doubt about it. But what made him a great leader, what set him apart, was his incredible sensitivity to his crew's needs.
Didn't he volunteer to kill the cook's cat when they were low on food?
He did, a small act maybe, but it showed he was willing to share the burden, to put himself in their shoes. It's about realizing that even as we strive for our goals, connecting with others, really understanding them, that's essential.
Shackleton, the empathetic explorer.
Yeah.
Okay, never thought of him like that.
One of the things I really appreciate about Greene's approach is that he kind of shakes things up, challenges those assumptions we have about, well, pretty much everything.
And especially, it seems, about gender roles. This is where things get really interesting. He goes way beyond that men are from Mars stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Forget Mars and Venus. Greene says, look, we've all got both masculine and feminine qualities inside us. It's not about what's on your driver's license, it's about recognizing those different energies within
It's
ourselves.
like that yin and yang idea, right?
Right.
Seemingly opposite, but they actually complement each other.
Exactly. And Greene argues that when we embrace both sides, the masculine and the feminine, it unlocks this whole new level of creativity in our work, relationships, you name it.
It's not about fitting into these rigid boxes, these outdated ideas about what's masculine or feminine. It's about finding that authentic balance.
Exactly. And one of the examples he gives is Caterina Sforza, a fascinating woman.
Katerina Sforza, remind me about her,
Okay, so she was this noble woman back in the Renaissance. And back then, well, women weren't exactly encouraged to be warriors or diplomats, right?
yeah, to say the least. Very much this stay in your lane era.
Right. But Katerina, she dove headfirst into those male dominated worlds. Military strategy, diplomacy, she was a force to be reckoned with.
She sounds incredible.
Oh, she was. But here's the thing, she also excelled in those traditionally feminine arts, too. Music, herbalism, she didn't limit herself.
Katerina Sforza,
Hmm.
breaking stereotypes and taking names.
Hmm.
I love it. Okay, shifting gears a bit here. Greene also talks about finding your true purpose, which, honestly, in a world this noisy and distracting, it can feel impossible.
It's the million-dollar question, right? And a lot of us get caught up in those false purposes, as Emery calls them, the things we think we should be doing, but they leave us feeling empty.
Chasing someone else's dream instead of our own.
Exactly. Finding your true purpose. It's about connecting with that inner drive, that spark that keeps you going, even when things get tough.
How do we find that spark? And once we do, how do we make sure it doesn't fizzle out? I know Greene talks about Coco Chanel here, right?
He does, and Chanel is a perfect example of how powerful mentorship can be. She knew she had this incredible talent for design, but she was also savvy enough to realize she needed guidance, especially on the business side of things.
So she surrounded herself with people who could support her vision, help her navigate that world.
Exactly. Having mentors, people who challenge you, push you to grow, that's invaluable. It's like having a personal board of advisors for your life.
Mentorship, the secret weapon. I like it. Now, Greene also dives into this idea of projecting authority. Now, I want to be clear, it's not about being bossy or dominant, right?
No, no, not at all. True authority, it goes much deeper than that. It's about cultivating a presence that inspires confidence, respect, the kind of presence that makes people want to follow your lead because they genuinely believe in what you're doing.
It's not about forcing people to do anything, it's about inspiring them.
Exactly. And Green uses John D. Rockefeller as an example, the oil
Oh,
tycoon.
yeah, Rockefeller. Didn't he use rumors strategically, like
Yeah.
to create this aura of power around himself?
He did. He knew how to use information, or sometimes the lack of information, to his advantage,
Hmm.
but he also understood the importance of showing vulnerability at the right times.
That's interesting. So it's not about being this unbreakable, untouchable figure.
Right. A little bit of vulnerability can actually make you more relatable, more human. Rockefeller, he knew how to play the game. It all comes down to understanding those subtle levers of influence. How to persuade, not through force, but through strategy.
It's like a dance, knowing when to lead, when to follow, when to reveal, when to conceal.
Exactly. And speaking of leading and following, when it comes to understanding those hidden forces, Green doesn't shy away from one of our most primal instincts, aggression.
Okay, now this is interesting because usually when we think of aggression, it's a negative thing.
It gets a bad rap. But
Yeah.
Green says, look, aggression at its core, it's just energy. It's that drive that pushes us to compete, to overcome challenges. It's what fuels our ambition.
So it's not about suppressing that energy, it's about channeling it.
Exactly. He makes this distinction between primitive aggression, which is impulsive and destructive, and sophisticated aggression.
So less Hulk smash and more. Chess Grandmaster.
Perfect analogy. One is reactive, uncontrolled. The other is strategic, purposeful, and ultimately much more effective. And to illustrate this, Green looks at the life of Georges Danton.
Danton. Wasn't he one of the leaders of the French Revolution?
He was a powerful speaker, a man of action. Danton, he channeled that aggressive energy into something that drove the revolution forward. He inspired people, rallied them to action.
He took that raw energy and turned it into a force for change.
Exactly. Which just goes to show you aggression, when it's consciously directed, can be incredibly powerful. But here's where things get really interesting. If aggression pushes us forward, Green suggests that our awareness of our own mortality, that's what provides the counterbalance.
Now, that's an interesting thought. Thinking about our own mortality can be, well, a bit heavy. But you're saying Green sees it as a source of insight.
Absolutely. He argues that when we acknowledge our mortality, not with fear, but with a sense of acceptance, it can bring incredible clarity and even a sense of liberation.
So we're back and ready to really dig into this idea of mortality shaping how we act.
It's interesting because it's not something we like to think about much, is it our own mortality?
Not really, it's kind of a downer.
Right, but Green argues that it's actually really important to think about.
Okay, how so
Well, he says, when we accept the fact that our time is limited, it can actually give us a lot more freedom and make us appreciate life more.
okay, that makes sense. Instead of fearing death, we should use it as a motivator to really live our lives to the fullest.
Exactly. And he uses the example of Flannery O'Connor. Again, remember her from last time she was the writer who died really young.
Oh yeah, I remember her. Her stories were so powerful and moving.
Right. And Green thinks that part of what made her writing so special was her awareness of her own mortality. He says that it allowed her to write with the kind of intensity and honesty that most people never achieve.
Wow, that's it's like she knew she didn't have time to waste on anything that wasn't real or true.
Right. And her story's a good reminder to all of us that our time is precious, so we should make the most of it and not be afraid to really go after what we want in life.
I love that message. And, thinking about everything we've talked about today with Green's book, it really does make you look at the world a little differently.
Absolutely. It's like he's given us this new set of lenses to see all the hidden forces that are driving our behavior and the behavior of everyone around us.
Right. From those shadows we try to hide to the illusions we create for ourselves, the envy, the grandiosity, the aggression, it's all part of what makes us human.
It is. And while it might not always be pretty, it's definitely fascinating.
It really is. And I think that's the beauty of Green's work. He doesn't shy away from the darker aspects of human nature, but he also shows us how to use that knowledge to live better, more fulfilling lives.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the laws of human nature, hopefully you're feeling inspired to learn more about yourself and the people around you.
And to make the most of this one precious life we've got. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of human nature.